We all want to believe that our parents did the best they could. And maybe they did. Maybe they truly gave everything they had, with the tools and understanding available to them at the time. But what happens when the choices they made, the words they said, or the ones they never dared to speak, the gestures they expressed, or their lack of presence altogether, continue to shape and even haunt our adult lives? What happens when we look back and begin to realize that the weight of their influence is still with us, affecting how we love, how we trust, and most of all, how we treat ourselves? There is a kind of silent pain that very few people are willing to acknowledge. It's the pain of having been hurt by those who were supposed to protect us. This pain is hard to admit, let alone confront, because it hides behind layers of excuses and cultural justifications. We hear phrases like, "That's just how things were back then," or "They had a tough life," or "They didn't know any better." And while these statements may carry some truth, they don't erase the emotional wounds left behind. The hurt remains, quietly influencing how we connect with others, how we set boundaries, and how we perceive our own worth. Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers in psychology, dedicated a significant part of his work to understanding how our childhood shapes the human psyche. He believed that the experiences we have during our formative years leave a permanent imprint on our unconscious mind. According to Jung, what we do not make conscious will continue to direct our lives from the shadows, and we will call it fate. Many of these unconscious forces, he argued, stem from the relationship we had, or didn't have, with our parents. Maybe you grew up with a father who was emotionally distant, someone who was physically there, but never truly present. And now, as an adult, you find it incredibly difficult to open up emotionally or to believe that people won't abandon you. Or perhaps your mother was overly critical, and now you live with an inner voice that constantly whispers, "You're not enough." Maybe you learned at a very young age to be a people pleaser, to suppress your own emotions, your desires, your needs, because every time you dared to express them, you were met with disapproval, silence, or even punishment. These wounds don't disappear simply because we age. They don't vanish just because we've learned to function in the adult world. They remain buried deep within us, hidden in the shadow parts of our psyche, quietly influencing our emotions, our choices, our relationships. That's why, no matter how much we try to move forward, we often find ourselves trapped in repetitive cycles, living out the same pain in different scenarios, over and over again. It can feel like life is pushing us into an endless loop of emotional déjà vu. But here's something crucial to understand. Healing doesn't begin by pointing fingers or assigning blame. Healing begins with awareness. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we relate to it. Forgiving our parents does not mean excusing their behavior or diminishing the pain we endured. It means releasing the burden we continue to carry. It means breaking the cycle so that it doesn't continue with us, so we don't unconsciously pass it down to our partners, to our children, or even to ourselves. So, how do we begin this process? How do we truly forgive and heal? First, we must recognize the root of the pain. We must come to terms with the fact that our childhood experiences have deeply shaped our adult identity. Only when we fully acknowledge how those early experiences molded us can we begin to untangle the emotional patterns that are no longer serving us. Our childhood doesn't just disappear because we grow up. It remains alive within us, echoing in our thoughts, reflected in our relationships, hidden in our fears, and repeated in our behavior. It is in childhood where the first seeds of our beliefs were planted. Beliefs about love, trust, safety, and our own self-worth. If those seeds were planted in soil filled with neglect, fear, criticism, or abandonment, then their roots still run deep into our adult lives, even if we don't see them clearly. Jung explained that the unresolved issues of our childhood continue to manifest unconsciously throughout our adult lives. This means that the emotional atmosphere we grew up in, the praise we did or didn't receive, the love we had to earn or were denied, the boundaries that were either too rigid or non-existent, becomes the blueprint for how we experience life as adults. We may not remember every moment of our early years, but our current emotions, reactions, and coping mechanisms are living reflections of what we absorbed back then. Think about this. A child who felt that they had to earn their parents' love by getting perfect grades, being obedient, never expressing anger or sadness, will likely grow up into an adult who constantly seeks validation. Someone who fears rejection, who tries too hard to be liked, who believes deep down that their value lies in what they do, not who they are, not because they consciously chose this way of being, but because their unconscious mind learned that this is how love works. Or consider a child who grew up in a home filled with judgment and criticism, where mistakes were met with shame instead of understanding. That child might become an adult who is terrified of failure, who sets impossibly high standards for themselves, who hears a relentless inner critic saying, "You're not good enough," every time they try something new. What began as a childhood defense mechanism becomes a life pattern, not because we want to suffer, but because the unconscious always seeks what's familiar, even if that familiarity brings pain. This is not about blaming our parents for every hardship we face. They too were shaped by their own stories, their own wounds, their own limited understanding of love. But it is about facing the truth. Our early experiences have impacted us more than we often realize, and until we bring that truth into the light, we will continue to relive the same emotional patterns again and again. So how do we recognize whether these childhood wounds are still alive within us? This is where the true journey inward begins, because these wounds, though invisible, are not silent. They speak through our behaviors, our relationships, our fears, and our anxieties. They show up in our struggles to trust, to express ourselves, to feel worthy. They appear in our perfectionism, our fear of rejection, our tendency to sabotage happiness the moment it feels real. Time alone doesn't heal these wounds. Denying them doesn't make them go away. Only by looking inward with honesty and compassion can we begin to understand where our pain comes from and how to begin healing it. This path isn't easy. It requires us to revisit the past, to feel things we've spent years avoiding, to unlearn what was never true. But in doing so, we begin to reclaim our power. We stop being controlled by old programs and begin to write a new story, one that is conscious, free, and rooted in self-awareness. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious does not remain in the darkness forever. Sooner or later, it seeks to express itself, and if we don't face it consciously, it will find its way to the surface, through our emotions, our life patterns, and even in our dreams. The unconscious is not silent. It waits for the moment to be seen, to be heard, and if we keep ignoring it, it will speak louder each time, through confusion, emotional chaos, and repeated suffering. One of the first signs of an unresolved wound is the presence of triggering emotions. Think about it. Have you ever found yourself reacting strongly, maybe even explosively, to something that, on the surface, seemed minor or insignificant. Chances are, you weren't just reacting to what was happening in the present. You were responding to something much older, something hidden deep within you. For instance, if someone offers you a simple critique, and you immediately feel anger, sadness, or a desperate urge to defend yourself, it may not be about what they said at all. It may be because during your childhood, you were taught, either through words or actions, that love and acceptance were conditional, that your worth depended on your performance. So now, every time you face criticism, your unconscious mind perceives it as a threat to your self-worth. It triggers the same insecurity you felt when you were a child, vulnerable and desperate to be seen as enough. Another powerful sign of unhealed wounds is the repetition of life patterns. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This means that if we do not heal what hurt us, we will continue to live it over and over again. It will return in different forms, different people, different places, but the pain will be the same. People who grew up with a deep fear of abandonment, for example, often find themselves in relationships where they constantly feel the need to prove they are lovable. They may overextend themselves, tolerate emotional neglect, or fall in love with people who are distant and unavailable, recreating, without realizing it, the emotional vacuum of their childhood. Others may find themselves sabotaging their own success because deep down they believe they don't deserve happiness, that joy and fulfillment are not meant for them. But there is an even deeper way that our unconscious communicates with us, through dreams. Jung believed dreams are symbolic messages from the unconscious. They are like letters from our inner world, revealing what our conscious mind refuses to see. A dream where you're being chased, for example, may symbolize a repressed emotion or unresolved fear that you're trying to avoid. Dreaming of a collapsing or abandoned house might represent a part of your psyche that feels neglected or broken, an inner structure that is falling apart and needs rebuilding. Even the appearance of authority figures in dreams can signal unresolved emotions related to your relationship with your parents. If you're someone who constantly seeks the approval of others, it could mean that, as a child, you never felt truly accepted by your parents. If you feel a compulsive need to control every aspect of your life, perhaps you grew up in an environment filled with chaos, and your nervous system learned to equate safety with control. Everything we do in the present has roots in our past. Every reaction, every fear, every compulsive behavior is tied to a moment, often long forgotten, that shaped how we see the world. But recognizing the wound is only the beginning. Healing is far more complex. There is something that makes this process even more difficult. The shadow. The shadow is the hidden side of our psyche, the part of ourselves we deny, reject, or simply don't want to see. Yet, it still affects us, silently but powerfully. When we think of our parents, we often fall into extremes. We either idealize them, convincing ourselves that they did the best they could, or we demonize them, blaming them entirely for our suffering. But the truth lies somewhere in between. Our parents were human beings, flawed, wounded, and shaped by their own unresolved pain. They too had shadows. They too carried fears that governed their behavior. And without knowing it, many of those shadows were passed down to us, not genetically, but emotionally and behaviorally. We inherit not only eye color or personality traits, but emotional patterns. We inherit silence, shame, emotional coldness, anxiety, overprotection, and the inability to express love freely. The things they could not heal often become the wounds we are left to confront, and unless we choose to face them, to look into the shadow and bring light to what has been hidden, we will continue to repeat the cycle. We will keep wondering why life feels heavy, why our relationships hurt, and why peace seems so distant. Carl Jung defined the shadow as the hidden side of our psyche, those parts of ourselves that we have repressed because we've learned to see them as unacceptable, shameful, or too painful to acknowledge. These are fragments of our personality that we've buried deep in the unconscious, often because, at some point in our lives, someone, perhaps a parent, a teacher, or society itself, told us that these traits were wrong or undesirable. But what we suppress does not vanish. It lingers in the shadows, operating silently, subtly shaping our choices, our relationships, and even our very identity. This same dynamic often manifests in how we perceive our parents. Many of us grow up denying their flaws, not because we don't see them, but because recognizing them hurts. Admitting that our parents made mistakes would mean accepting that the very people who were supposed to love and protect us may have also hurt or failed us. And that's an excruciating truth to face. In some cases, we swing to the opposite extreme, demonizing our parents, turning them into villains in our internal narrative, and clinging to resentment as a form of emotional armor. But here's the paradox. Even when we resent them, we remain emotionally tied to them through that very resentment. We're still bound to them, still haunted by their influence, still reacting to wounds left unhealed. Yet the family shadow goes beyond how we see our parents. It's also embedded in the patterns and behaviors we've unconsciously inherited. Perhaps we were raised by an emotionally distant father, and we've spent our lives rejecting that coldness, vowing to be different. But if we're brutally honest, how often do we withhold our emotions? How many times have we created distance in our relationships without realizing it? The truth is, what we most resent in our parents often mirrors what we've internalized in ourselves. It's easier to see their mistakes than to confront the ways we've replicated them. It's simpler to say, "My mother didn't know how to love," than to ask ourselves, in what ways do I also struggle to express love? It's easier to blame our father for being overly critical than to acknowledge how harsh we've become with ourselves or with others. The shadow isn't just what we hate about our parents. It's also what we unknowingly carry forward, what we repeat, what we become. And until we bring these unconscious truths into the light, we remain trapped in cycles of repetition, living out the same pain, making the same choices, becoming the very people we swore we'd never be. When we're not aware of our shadow, we project it onto others. This is where the psychological mechanism of projection comes into play. One of the most subtle, yet powerful ways the unconscious forces us to face what we don't want to see. Carl Jung explained that we project onto others the parts of ourselves we cannot accept. In other words, what we refuse to acknowledge within, we begin to see outside of us, in the behaviors of others, in our partners, our friends, our children. Projection is the unconscious mind's defense. It shields us from the pain of self-confrontation by making the problem appear external. But this also keeps us stuck. When we don't make our wounds conscious, we are doomed to repeat them, often without even realizing it. Consider this. If we were raised by excessively demanding parents, we might grow into adults who push ourselves relentlessly, never feeling good enough, never allowing ourselves rest. Or we might become critical of others, echoing the harsh voices from our past. If we grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where one day we felt embraced and the next ignored, we may now find ourselves attracted to chaotic relationships, drawn to emotional highs and lows that feel disturbingly familiar. We may complain about feeling unloved or abandoned, unaware that we are choosing relationships that replicate the emotional instability we once knew. This is no coincidence. The unconscious seeks what is familiar, even if it hurts. There is a powerful exercise worth trying. Think about the traits in your parents that bothered you the most. Were they authoritarian, emotionally unavailable, cold, or dismissive? Now ask yourself with raw honesty, in what ways have I adopted those same behaviors? Perhaps not in obvious ways, but in small habits, in how you speak to yourself, in how you treat others. What we reject in our parents often becomes what we unknowingly carry within. And what's most ironic is that many of us are unconsciously drawn to people who resemble our parents, hoping deep down to rewrite the story, to heal the original wound by reliving it in a different way. But healing doesn't come from repeating the pattern. It comes from breaking it. Recognizing these patterns is only the first step. True healing requires something deeper, a conscious journey toward what Jung called individuation. This is the process through which we integrate all parts of our psyche and become whole. It's how we move beyond the injuries and limitations of our past and step into the person we were always meant to be. Healing does not mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean justifying the pain or pretending everything was okay. Healing means we no longer allow our history to control us. It means reclaiming our power, our agency, our identity. Individuation, according to Jung, is about becoming your most authentic self. It's not about being perfect. It's about being whole. But this journey is not automatic. It requires deep, conscious work. We must be willing to face what we've spent years avoiding. We must look within and confront the inner child, still carrying wounds that were never validated, never soothed. There are 4 essential steps on this path. Acknowledge the wound without victimhood. We cannot heal what we don't recognize. This means admitting that our childhood left marks, some subtle, some deep. It's not about blaming our parents forever or staying trapped in anger. It's about giving our pain a name. But the wound should not define us. We are not just the wounded child. We are much more than our suffering. Embrace the shadow without fear. What we reject in ourselves often ends up controlling us. Jung believed that unless we confront our shadow, we will keep projecting it onto the world. That means accepting that, in many ways, we have repeated what once hurt us. Maybe we vowed not to become like our parents, but we found ourselves in eerily similar patterns. The key is not self-punishment. It's awareness and the conscious choice to change course, free ourselves from projection, and see our parents with clarity. Real healing happens when we stop viewing our parents through the eyes of the wounded child. Neither idealize them nor vilify them. Understand them. They too were shaped by their own pain and limitations. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it does humanize them. True freedom begins when we stop expecting them to be different, and instead give ourselves the love and validation we once sought from them. Consciously decide who we want to be. This is the most crucial step. We cannot change our childhood, but we can choose how we respond to it. Will we continue living out unconscious patterns, or will we reclaim authorship over our story? Individuation is about becoming the person we choose to be, not the person our wounds created. Many people have turned their pain into power. Those who suffered abandonment have learned to support themselves with love. Those who feared rejection discovered that their worth is not up for negotiation. Those who felt they were never enough have realized that the only approval they need is their own. And yet, there remains one final profound step in this process, the most difficult, but also the most transformative: forgiveness. Not as a favor to our parents, not because they deserve it, but as a gift to ourselves. Forgiveness is not about forgetting or minimizing the pain. It is not about saying, "It wasn't that bad." Forgiveness in its purest form is a form of personal liberation. It is the moment we stop carrying the weight of the past, the moment we set ourselves free. Carl Jung spoke of the process of integration, a deep inner journey that invites us to see our personal history with unflinching clarity, stripped of both victimhood and denial. It's not about painting ourselves as helpless or pretending nothing happened. Instead, it's about facing the truth as it is. In this process, we stop idealizing our parents as flawless heroes or condemning them as ruthless villains. We begin to see them for what they truly are: human beings, humans with their own wounds, their own shadows, their own emotional limitations. So often, we carry a silent resentment we don't even realize is hurting us. It festers quietly, shaping our thoughts and relationships. We hold on to the idea that our parents should have been different, that they should have known better, should have done more, should have loved more consciously. And while that feeling is deeply valid, born from very real emotional needs, the truth remains: the past cannot be rewritten. Waiting for emotional justice, waiting for the apology that may never come, only extends our suffering and delays our healing. True forgiveness is not about convincing ourselves that the pain inflicted upon us was somehow okay. It's not about erasing what happened. Forgiveness begins when we decide we no longer want that pain to shape our lives. It happens when we refuse to let the past keep dictating our present. A person with an emotionally absent father, for example, may spend a lifetime consumed by resentment, feeling abandoned, and constantly asking why they were never loved the way they needed. But that person also has the power to pause, to reflect, and to ask themselves a different question. Who was my father before he became my father? What story shaped him? What emotional wounds did he carry long before I ever entered the picture? Jung reminded us of a powerful truth: what we fail to integrate will continue to repeat itself. If we remain shackled to anger and blame, it is likely that the same unresolved pain will continue showing up in our relationships and patterns. If we are constantly waiting for our parents to acknowledge the damage they caused, we are still giving them control over our emotions and our healing. Taking back that power means choosing to look inward instead. There is a powerful practice that can help us with this process. It begins with writing a letter, raw, honest, uncensored. Say everything you've ever wanted to say. Speak from your pain, from your anger, from your sadness. Don't hold anything back. Then, take a second sheet of paper and write a response as if you were your parent, not to excuse their actions, but to see their story from a new perspective. Try to understand what they might have felt, what they might have gone through, what emotional burdens they carried. This exercise is not about justifying what they did. It's about releasing the emotional weight we've been holding for so long. It's about realizing that healing is a journey we must choose to walk ourselves. At the end of the day, the responsibility for our healing does not belong to anyone else. It belongs to us. And there is one final lesson that has the power to transform your life forever. How to turn your pain into wisdom. Because true transformation is not just about letting go of the past. It's about using that past to create a more conscious and authentic life. You cannot change what happened, but you can choose what you will do with it. Childhood leaves marks. Some are visible. Others are hidden deep within the unconscious. We spend years trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand why our parents were the way they were, why they hurt us, why they never gave us what we so desperately needed. But there comes a point in every journey when a choice must be made. Will we continue to be prisoners of our story, or will we choose to transform the pain into wisdom? Carl Jung taught us that true growth occurs when we stop running from our shadow and begin to embrace it. The same principle applies to our past. It's not about ignoring what happened. It's not about staying stuck in resentment. It's about looking at our history with new eyes. It's about turning every scar into fuel for transformation. That childhood wound, the one that left you feeling abandoned, unworthy, unseen, can become the very force that helps you grow. If you were never emotionally supported, you can learn to be the one who holds yourself with tenderness. If you were told you were not enough, you can now become the one who affirms your worth without waiting for anyone else's validation. If you grew up in an emotionally cold environment, you have the power to break that cycle and become someone who loves with presence and awareness. Nothing you experienced was in vain. Every moment, every tear, every disappointment carries within it the potential to become a source of strength and understanding. What hurt you does not have to define you, but what you do with that pain, how you choose to carry it forward, that can define everything. And now, the question remains, what will you do with what you've just uncovered? If this message resonated with you, it's not by accident. Something inside you is ready to heal, ready to evolve. Maybe you can't change the past, but you can change your relationship with it. And in that choice, in that shift, lies the real freedom. If this message resonated with you, and you believe someone else needs to hear it too, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And help us reach more people who are ready to heal, grow, and reclaim their lives. Remember, your past does not define you. Your choices do. You have the power to turn your pain into purpose, your wounds into wisdom, and your story into a source of light for others. Keep going. You're not alone, and your healing journey has already begun.